What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Nobody 2, the sequel to the hit film from 2021. And I'll go ahead and say it. If you like the first Nobody, there's a very good chance you're going to like Nobody 2. It's basically the exact same movie, but set in an amusement park with a few new faces, a few new villains. And if your idea of a good time is watching Bob Odenkirk play a retired government assassin, beating the crap out of people, and if that fails, shooting a lot of people, or if that fails, blowing up a lot of people, then Nobody 2 is going to be right up your alley. And I would argue that it has a few advantages over the first movie, but a few disadvantages, which I'll get into in my spoiler section. I'll go spoiler-free initially, but then I'll give you a verbal warning as well as a time code below before going into any specifics. But I should mention that we have a slightly different creative team this time around. It's directed by Timo Tjahjanto, the Indonesian director who gave us The Night Comes For Us. I think a strong contender for the best action movie of the last 10 years. I don't think he has matched or equaled The Night Comes For Us since The Night Comes For Us, but I will watch every single movie he ever makes for the rest of his life due to that movie. But if The Night Comes For Us is a little too grim and relentless and merciless for your taste, you might find yourself enjoying Nobody 2 because it's got a much more lighthearted tone thanks to writers Derek Kolstad and Eric Rabin. And even though the movie features an absolute murderer's row or a who's who of corrupt cops and lethal assassins and mercenaries and all the usual bad guys you see in a movie like this, the movie takes place in an amusement park or a water park that has seen better days a few decades in the past. So if you have a sentimental affection for all the shitty food that you eat at those places while getting sunburned and so on and so forth, you might find the setting very enjoyable, especially once the fists start flying, the kicks start flying. And what I like about Bob Odenkirk's character, Hutch, is that he doesn't have really pretty spinning kicks and he doesn't have amazing Brazilian jiu-jitsu or anything like that. He doesn't have any really spectacular gifts. He just won't go down. He just refuses to die. No matter how much you hit him, kick him, smash his face in, he just will wearily kind of groan and get back up and will just keep coming on. And I think that's the best way to go about making these kind of mean old man action movies, especially when you have a guy who's better known for comedy. I mean, Bob Odenkirk, I've been watching him for decades. I was watching him in the Larry Sanders Show in the 1990s, the Ben Stiller Show, Mr. Show, a lot of shows with the name show in the title or the word show in the title. But obviously in recent years, he's been better known for shows like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, where he really got to show that he's got legit dramatic chops when he wants to. And I have to say thank you to Bob Odenkirk indirectly because through Better Call Saul and my weekly breakdowns, that was actually a show that was instrumental in growing the subscriber base of this channel. I kind of wish they'd bring that show back because it was really good for this channel. Love Better Call Saul. I hope he won't completely abandon his comedic roots, but if he wants to make mean old man action movies like Liam Neeson, well then, yeah, I'll keep showing up and watching Nobody 3, 4, 5, etc. But speaking of Liam Neeson, what I would love to see, if Bob Odenkirk could make more of like a tongue-in-cheek kind of comedic action movie, something like The Naked Gun, which Liam Neeson just made. I mean, Bob Odenkirk, with his history of comedy, he is, he would be pitch-perfect casting for a movie like that. But as much as Bob Odenkirk might be the feature attraction in the Nobody franchise, it's not a one-man show. We have Connie Nielsen back as his wife. We've got Christopher Lloyd, who I've been watching since Back to the Future when I was a little boy, back as his father, who's still more than capable of blowing a few heads off as long as people come pretty close to his lawn chair where we might have a sniper rifle showed up, he can still participate in some of these combat scenes. We have the RZA back as the adopted younger brother. And for people who don't know, the RZA, in addition to being a musician and a big-time producer and that sort of thing, he is a martial arts junkie when it comes to old-fashioned movies from like the 70s and 80s. And one of the reasons he got the job doing the soundtrack to Kill Bill Volume 1, apparently he and Tarantino bumped into each other at one point and just started talking about martial arts films from the 70s and 80s, and they finally realized, all right, these are two guys that absolutely speak the same language. So it's cool seeing RZA, even though he's gotten a little older, still whipping out swords and, saying some really lethal, evil, poetic shit in combat. And so, yeah, as long as they keep making these movies, I hope the RZA will stay involved. And as far as the new faces are concerned, we now have John Ortiz, who runs the theme park, and I've been liking John Ortiz since I saw him in Carlito's Way back in the early 90s. I still think that's the best role that he's ever had, but I like seeing him work. We have Colin Hanks as kind of a shady sheriff, and I'll just say Colin Hanks is about as threatening and about as intimidating as like a wet, damp sandwich that's been in the back of your refrigerator for days and has lost all of its flavor. I don't know how Colin Hanks got cast in this role. I love seeing him work, but he was poorly cast as this role. But Sharon Stone, She's pretty goddamn good as the main villain, Lendina. I mean, as a self-proclaimed aging gentleman of leisure, I was once upon a time a horny young teenager back when she was starring in movies like Total Recall and Basic Instinct, and obviously lifelong fan of Sharon Stone for obvious reasons.
Have you ever fucked on cocaine, Nick?
And it's fun seeing her kind of hamming it up as a kind of an over-the-top villain in this movie. And I've always heard that Sharon Stone is a bit of a sociopath in real life, so it makes perfect sense that she'd be playing a villain in this movie. But irrespective of what you or I might think of the cast members involved, in the end, the Nobody franchise is an action franchise, and it is by the action scenes that these movies must be judged. And I'll say this. For a $25 million action movie, which is a slight increase over the previous movie, which was made for $16 million, which grossed $57 million. Did very well for a low-budget action movie. But this time around, they've got $25 million. It has some of the best action scenes you're going to see all year. And my question is, how come a movie made for $25 million can deliver 2 or 3 action scenes that are vastly superior to action scenes that we see in $200 million movies? Like, on those big, giant budget movies, I feel like somebody must be stealing the money or embezzling the money, but I feel like the money's not showing up on the screen. Hire Timo Shayanto, or however you pronounce his last name, to direct some friggin' Marvel movies or Jurassic Park movies or DC movies, because he knows how to stage a great action scene. And the key is just have a few people, a cool location, and just let them unleash hell. There is a scene here which is a direct homage to the bus scene from the first movie. And I feel like the bus scene was probably the best scene in the first movie. But my favorite scene in this movie is the very first scene where, I guess vaguely kind of spoiler light, but it's from the trailer. But the very first scene where Bob Odenkirk finally loses his shit, where his family's at an arcade, a minor scuffle begins, and somebody has the goddamn gall or the audacity to kind of smack at the back of the head of Bob Odenkirk's daughter.
Now! I understand protecting your sister, but...
And I just started cracking up because I knew what was about to happen. And as we see in the trailer, the family leaves the arcade and he's like, all right, I got to go back and do one thing. And as he heads back in, I just started cracking up in anticipation, knowing that I was about to see some really violent shit. And as long as I'm being complimentary of the movie, I should add the movie's only 89 minutes long. And for many, many years, I used to complain that all movies were way too expensive and way too long and don't earn their excessive running times. But I've been noticing this year a small, quiet trend of tight, economical, short movies that are starting to make a comeback, including Naked Gun, which came out, 2 weeks ago. Bring on the 90-minute movies. I grew up on 90-minute movies. I don't even mind when movies are a little bit shorter. In the early 30s, feature films used to be like 70 or 75 minutes long. They're basically slightly longer than your average episode of television. Most stories just aren't interesting enough to sustain your interest for like 2.5 hours unless it is just fucking awesome. And my dad has a different attitude. He just has so much fun going to the movies. He just wants to stay there all goddamn night. I'm like, well, you can watch it again or you can go see another movie. I feel like every story should be the best version of itself that it can possibly be. And also, just as far as the business is concerned, you could have more show times per day with a tight economical running time. Although on that front, I should say I went to an AMC to see this. The AMC theater chain is guilty of, double dipping when it comes to having too many commercials and too many trailers before the movie. I walked in at 2 o'clock and I walked out at 4 o'clock. So that's a half hour of commercials and trailers. And I'm sorry, if I'm paying for the privilege of seeing your movie, like it's $20-25 here in New York, I don't want to see any commercials. Like, for me, anytime I see ads for anything, I should get the experience for free. So if people want to start offering free movie tickets, I will accept that all day long. But if you want me to watch 5 Toyota Jeep commercials or whatever the case might be, then I demand that I not pay for the experience. And as long as I'm paying for a subscription service or renting a movie or whatever, I expect to go commercial free. You can't double dip, but what I would love to see is a proper compare and contrast of what would happen if you removed all the non-movie related commercials and basically added 1 or 2 more show times per day. Would you make more money from additional ticket sales, or do you still make more money from allowing, like your local furniture store to have a 2-minute ad before your movie? I would argue that it detracts from the experience, and I've started noticing that a lot of people are showing up really, really late for movies now, and they're skipping all the ads anyway because they know there's a half-hour padding before the movie starts. So why pay for advertising in a theater if nobody's going to watch your commercial anyway? So yeah, the commercials before AMC movies gotta go. But as far as the economics surrounding this movie are concerned, I would argue that there are enough great fight scenes in the first like 2/3 where it's absolutely worth the price of admission. But now I got to get into some spoilers because I have a few grievances, a few bones to pick with this movie. And let's just start with the climax of the movie, where due to the ever-growing cast of characters, they're trying to find increasingly implausible ways to incorporate all the family members and friends and that sort of thing. And while I can totally buy the idea of like a retired government assassin who is like, basically coming out of retirement in order to kick a few more asses, I start calling bullshit when like the son is choking people out, or when the guy running the amusement park is involved in a giant battle scene with like grenades and landmines, or when the wife of Bob Odenkirk is suddenly an expert marksman and like shooting knives out of the air. I'm like, this is total bullshit. And also in the context of this fictional setting, if suddenly everybody can kick all kinds of ass, well then the character of Hutch, aka Nobody, aka Bob Odenkirk, he's no longer interesting. He no longer possesses an interesting set of skills, because these skills seem to be possessed by every single person in the movie. And if every single person in the movie is capable of having like knife fights or sword fights or, shooting rocket launchers or whatever the case might be, well then it has a huge impact on the stakes and just the overall tension and suspense of the movie. And admittedly, this movie is a little bit more lighthearted than the previous one, but for like the first 2/3, you still get the sense that the bad guys are a threat and actually might do terrible, horrible things, and that Bob Odenkirk might have to step up for his family and defend them. But it's like, well, if they're all perfectly capable of defending themselves after a day or two of like, hitting like the BB range at the amusement park, I mean, that it's just absolutely idiotic that they would add that into the movie. We have a scene where Connie Nielsen's character, who sells houses for a living, she's, a middle-aged suburban mom who sells houses. They go to the amusement park, and she's shooting the little BB gun and doing well. I'm like, oh my God, Mom, you're so good. By the end of the movie, she quite literally is shooting blades out of the air as they're flying toward her. It was idiotic. And if the overall trend or trajectory of this franchise is moving increasingly toward everybody in this universe is automatically like a martial arts expert, then the franchise will rapidly exhaust all the goodwill and all the appeal that it's established over the last few years. And I'm always on the lookout for new original franchises that are unique to this decade, that are not based on franchises from the past. And some might say, well, you're having a bit of a double standard. How come you're willing to buy Christopher Lloyd as like a mean old man, on a lounge chair shooting people? I'm like, what? He was like an assassin for 50, 60 years, and they bring in his history into this movie. I get that he still has one or two more shots left in him. The guy running the amusement park, John Ortiz, I'm sorry, I just don't buy it that he's suddenly taking on 15 guys in body armor and machine guns and walkie-talkies and that whole thing. So I think that it was a critical error in judgment, basically trying to get as many people in on the action, in on the party at the end. The ending of the first movie, where you have RZA, Christopher Lloyd, and Bob Odenkirk all standing like back to back, that's about as big as the central team needs to be. And what it leads to, unfortunately, is a series of last-minute rescues where somebody's on the ground, weak and wounded, about to get hurt, about to get their head blown off, and somebody shows up and kills the bad guy. Then that person's weak and wounded, and then another person shows up and bails them out, and it gets very repetitive. And so any time in the last like 10 or 15 minutes of the movie where somebody appears to be in trouble, all right, all I got to do is count like slowly from 1 to 5, and eventually somebody's going to show up and save their bacon. And it just gets fucking boring. So like I said, the first 2/3 of the movie has some really gnarly fight scenes where it's basically Bob Odenkirk versus 4 or 5 guys, and those are by far the best scenes in the movie. But as long as I'm being critical, let me add another complaint to the existing pile. Hollywood has to stop writing children as little demons that bite the hand that feeds them. And it seems like every single Hollywood show or movie has the exact same writing staff to write the exact same type of child. I'm like, do all of your children behave this way? Or this like how you like want them to behave? But like, we have this horrible situation in so many shows and movies, as well as Nobody 2, where children are constantly huffing and puffing and laying a big guilt trip on one of their parents if they have to work for a living. I'm like, you know what? If I'm putting a roof over your head and food in your belly, all I want to hear is gratitude. And also, when I was a little kid, anytime I heard that somebody in my family had to go to work, I'm like, all right, yeah, less supervision, more freedom for me. Woohoo! Like, I just don't buy this trope or this cliche where little kids are constantly laying a guilt trip on their parents for working 50, 60 hours a week in order to, put a roof over their heads. If anything, those kids are like, all right, well, that means I get to sneak out more easily, or I can stay up all night playing Nintendo, or, chatting with my friends, or whatever the case might be. It's just absolutely moronic. But because the movie chooses to go this route over like the first 20 minutes or so, I was getting real fucking fed up and real bored real goddamn quickly. And I kept thinking to myself, they better hurry up and get to the amusement park where they're all going to try to reestablish all their family ties and build new memories, etc. They better hurry up and get there as soon as humanly possible, because this movie is rapidly wearing out its welcome. Because if filmmakers want the audience to be emotionally invested in the story, to care about the welfare of this family as they attempt to build new memories out of this kind of run down amusement park, well, then you actually have to present characters that we will like. And if you present the family as a bunch of brats who are constantly laying a big guilt trip on the father for going out and working, as opposed to going to their latest Little League baseball game or whatever stupid shit they're pouting about at the beginning, I'm sorry, if you intensely dislike the characters, then no one's going to give a shit about whether or not they successfully reconnect or bond or whatever when they... I'm tempted to keep calling it Wally World. Obviously, Wally World is from National Lampoon's Vacation, a movie which I've seen 150 billion times, so I don't know if I have room in my imagination for any more names for any more amusement parks. In any case, it's basically Wally World with a few more slides. But on the whole, I did enjoy it. I can ignore Colin Hanks and his lame, corrupt sheriff routine, and I can ignore the scenes where the kids are acting like brats, and I can even ignore some of the ridiculous action scenes toward the end of the movie as everybody and their mother suddenly is participating in this giant battle, because in the end, what I was paying for was to watch Bob Odenkirk show up and beat the crap out of a few people in a few memorable scenes. And when it comes to staging and choreographing kick-ass action scenes, Timo Chayanto is one of the best in the world. Is he the best in the world? If I were to compare Chayanto to some of his peers that are active today, Gareth Evans is probably still my favorite. His most recent movie, Havoc, was a bit of an uneven experience. Once the action begins in the second half, I was like, oh my God, nobody does it. Nobody films and stages and choreographs shootouts and or hand-to-hand combat quite like Gareth Evans. But Chayanto's pretty goddamn good. But there's been a lot of competition on that front this year. We've had The Accountant 2. We've had Ballerina. Ballerina has some great fight scenes. The movie underperformed, but it has some great action scenes. We had A Working Man with Jason Statham. We had The Amateur, which is more of a spy thriller than an action movie, but it did still have some action. I hear that Blood Brothers over on Netflix, which is, I believe, an Indian action movie, apparently that's really good as well. So if you're a fan of action, it's been a pretty good year so far. But what I like about Nobody 2 is, once again, $25 million movie, 89-minute runtime. Everybody is always saying, whatever happened to the mid-budget movie? Whatever happened to the mid-range movie? Whatever happened to, movies with nice short running times? Well, here it is. Nobody 2. It's in the theater. If you want to see more tight, economical, more or less effective, entertaining, crowd-pleasing action movies, well then consider giving a few dollars to Nobody 2 this weekend.
I'm on fucking vacation!
Is it going to change your life or change the way you look at the action genre? Probably not, but I would say that it more or less delivers on what you expect from Nobody 2. Although I should issue one word of caution. We might be entering or beginning to get to the end stage of that kind of John Wick style of action movie, where I feel like there are too many choreographers who saw how popular the John Wick franchise became, and they've been kind of imitating and or mimicking what they call the gun fu style, where it's a mix of martial arts with handguns, where instead of punching somebody, you might punch with your gun and take them out. It's cool and it's effective and I like it, but we are starting to get some depressing levels of sameness or familiarity between action movies, and I get it. If you're going to film somebody punching somebody, how many different ways can you do it to make it feel fresh or original? And going back to the very beginning of movies, people have been trying to find fresh, innovative ways to stage shootouts and fight scenes and that sort of thing. But every once in a while, once you feel like there's that cinema has exhausted any and all possibilities when it comes to staging an action scene, somebody will come along and show you something you've never seen before. And so Nobody 2, it's not earth-shattering, it's not innovative, but it is entertaining, it is crowd-pleasing. I laughed out loud several times, I enjoyed a couple of the scenes, and I think that's about all I have to say about this movie, or I'm going to start running the risk of just repeating myself over and over again. So let's wrap this sucker up. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell. But I hope everybody has a great weekend at the movies, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.